Hello, hello. We're just letting people filter back in. We'll get started in just a minute or two. This is amazing. We have a big group of people, almost 300 attendees and over 300 and counting, which is very exciting. We will get just started in just a minute.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
back.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference. I'm Angela Willits, and I'm happy that you're here for this breakout presentation titled Raising and Leading with Clarity Inside Chaos with Dr. Sagashus Levingston. To briefly share a visual description of me, I am a middle-aged white woman with glasses, brown hair, and a white sweater, and I am coming from my home office outside of Madison, Wisconsin. I'd like to take a moment to share our university's land acknowledgement. The University of Madison, UW-Madison, Wisconsin, and the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work occupy ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Daejeop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Next, I'd like to give a few quick Zoom reminders. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on our conference website at a later date. To access this presentation, you are required to provide your name and email. This allows us to log our attendees and email you information on CEUs for this presentation, which will be distributed via email at a later date. Your cameras and microphones will remain muted, but we have a Q&A feature where you can submit questions for our presenter. Just please know that due to the large volume of attendees, we likely won't be able to get to all of the questions that are submitted. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Sagashus Levingston. Dr. Sagashus Levingston is an author, educator, and founder of Infamous Mothers, a lifestyle and community building platform centered on whole living, leadership, and generational healing. She is the author of A Pot to Piss In, a memoir that explores power, identity, and intentional living regardless of circumstances. From that book, she teaches about power of authoring one's own story. Dr. Levingston holds a PhD and has spent her career working at the intersection of education, racial justice, community wellness, and narrative healing. Her work focuses on values-driven leadership, trauma-informed practice, and supporting individuals in maintaining clarity, dignity, and agency during times of uncertainty. And I also just want to say real quickly, Sagashus has been a part of this conference almost since its beginning. I think this is our third time having Sagashus here as a presenter, and she's consistently and always amazing. So we're so happy to have you here. And on that note, Sagashus, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Angela. So before I go into what I came here to do today, I need to just say that Angela is the real MVP because the way she has to wrangle me in, I need to get it together. But I am so grateful for the support, for being chosen for this event. It's always an honor to serve. Now, I'm going to tell you all something. I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you all how lucky you are to have me today. You're lucky to have me in your presence because last night I got a phone call. A friend of mine said, "Hey, Sagacious, I'm going through something. Can you come out?" I said, "Absolutely." I don't say that often. I rarely go out, but I heard something in this particular friend's voice. The friend said, Sagacious, I'm feeling overwhelmed. The friend ordered themselves some drinks. I only drink amaretto when I go out because I know what amaretto would do and won't what it won't do. But this friend decided to give me something a little bit stronger. I drank the drink, and all of a sudden, I couldn't feel my legs. If you've met me, you know I'm not a little woman. I was rolling around trying to climb in the friend's truck, but I only felt my torso, and I kept saying, I got to survive this because I have to make it to this conference in the morning. Um, I kept thinking about you all while I was trying to get to this conference this morning. And I tell that story. I tell that story for a little bit of humor, but I tell it because I always open by saying, I'm always grateful and fortunate when I'm invited and when I'm chosen to share the work that I do. But I'm also thinking in particular about how fortunate I am that you all made it this morning. You could have been 1,001 million places. I had my experiences last night. Some of you, while I was outside trying to figure out my life, was probably in bed like normal, respectable people would be. Some of you all were dealing with sick children. Some of you all were probably arguing with a partner. Some of you all was dealing with news you had just gotten for the very first time. We were all going through whatever we were going through last night. And yet you're here today. So with that being said, I want to say thank you all for showing up today. I want to say I am honored, but I also shared that story, which might seem like a very silly story to start with, because we're living in a time where things feel very serious. And I can tell you in a little bit when I start going into the work that I'm doing, my story is about to be serious. And I want you to remember, no matter how serious my story gets, I am the woman who was rolling around with my chubby, fat self. And I say that with all confidence, who couldn't feel my legs last night. I am the person that's silly and I try to be as down to earth and sincere as possible. But when you hear a little bit about my story, um, hold on to those moments, right? Um, because it's going to get real. With that being said, good morning. Thank you for being here with me. Before I begin, I want to name the moment that we're all standing in right now. We're living in a time where many of the families you serve and many of us personally are navigating fear, uncertainty, and instability as a baseline. There's a lot that feels unpredictable right now. Systems feel shaky, safety feels conditional. And for many people, especially people living at the margins, danger doesn't announce itself, it just shows up. I want to be clear about this, what this session is not. This is not a talk about poverty as a concept. It's not a talk about resilience as a buzzword. And it's not a talk about doing it right under impossible conditions. This session is about leadership, it's about care, it's about meaning making when safety is not guaranteed. Today, I'm going to read an entire chapter from my book, Apocalypse, entitled Poverty Does Shit to You. And I want to say up front, this is intentional. As social workers, you understand that story is not decoration. You understand that story is data. You understand that story is assessment. Story is often the most honest place where systems, fear, love, and power reveal themselves. So before I read, I want to invite you to listen in a very particular way. As you listen, I ask that you do not listen for pathology, that you do not listen for what went wrong, that you do not listen for deficits. Instead, I'm inviting you to listen for three things. First, listen for how fear organizes behavior, not just in me, but in children and families and in systems. Second, I invite you to listen for how leadership shows up without authority or safety, how power is practiced when there is no room for mistakes. And third, I want you to listen for how culture, language, and shared meaning can stabilize people even when circumstances remain unstable. This chapter captures a period of my life when I was parenting six children inside conditions that were uncertain, unsafe, and deeply scrutinized. I didn't have the language then that I have now. I wasn't thinking in frameworks and models. I was thinking in survival, responsibility, love, and fear. What you're about to hear is not a success story and is not a redemption arc. It's a real time account of a parent refusing to let circumstances dictate identity, values, or meaning, and discovering that even inside danger, conscious choice still matters. I invite you to listen not as evaluators, but as witnesses. And when I finish reading, we'll step back together and name what was happening beneath the surface, what this story reveals about grounded leadership, relational integrity, and care in times when waiting for safety is not an option. I'm hoping that all right. So with that being said, I'm hoping that as I read, you're able to be present in the moment, not in a policing type of way, but I'm hoping that the reading itself will lend itself to creating a safe space for you to just be, for you to listen, for you to um, experience the moment and to live in it. And so a lot of that responsibility falls on me, right? And how I read this. So cross your fingers and just pray I do a good job. All right. So I'm reading from chapter 4 of my memoir called Apocalypse, and this chapter is called Poverty Does Shit to You. And it's set in January 2021. Now, what's important is there are other chapters prior, and each chapter is me tugging and struggling with this idea of, is it time for me to go from renting to owning a home? And I'm talking in each particular chapter about the real stakes of what this means. So the first chapter, I'm talking about the first chapter I'm looking at is called Robert and Sylvia, and it's talking about this introduction, and is set in a time where I kind of fast forward the story a little bit. This chapter 2 is, you know what? Let me not give y'all wrong. Chapter 2 is called Doctor, and I'm looking at what does it mean to finally complete my PhD and then go back home. And I had this idea of what life was going to be. In my mind, life had frozen and waited for me to finish the PhD and I go back home. My parents are older. So now I'm thinking about elder care and being sandwiched between two generations and the idea of what does it mean to care for my dad when I'm renting and he's not allowed to live with me and he has dementia. The next chapter I'm looking at is called Felons Can't Rent. So I'm introducing this idea of having a partner that's incarcerated and he's on his way home. And what does it mean for him to come home and I'm renting, and what is our living situation is going to be? We get to chapter 4, and this is about my relationship with my children and what's going on with that, and how this shapes this drive to purchase a home. And it's also looking at the intersection between my life, my children's lives, and systems, right? And if you know anything about me, if you've encountered my work before, then social workers are near and dear to me. As a single mom of six, there's always this concern and this fear and this anxiety about, will the social workers be coming to my house for any reason, right? Especially as a mom who is living in poverty, living with poverty, right? So this chapter, I want to read it all because I think it's information and insight. It's almost like it's a case study. Imagine it as a case study. Um, and so with that said, I'll begin. It's a little after 10 o'clock at night. Oh, wait, y'all, I'm in the wrong chapter. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm reading Doctor. Hold on. My apologies. All right. I'm washing piles of clothes in the laundry room, trying to clear my head and think about my next move. Where are we going to live? How can I make my business more profitable? Thoughts race 1,000 miles a minute as I work alone in this cozy space. There are only two washers and two dryers in it, but this laundry room in my building is my getaway. It's my excuse to leave the apartment without leaving the building. So I am absent and present simultaneously. Taking up space with my laundry baskets and clothes spread out everywhere, the message is clear. I'm going to be at this for a while. Washing, drying, and folding is an all day job. I often multitask, catching up on missed calls or listening to audiobooks. But this day, I find myself washing, drying, folding, and thinking. The hum of the washing machine fills the small laundry room, a steady, monotonous sound that usually helps to quiet my thoughts. But today, it is drowned out by the relentless uneasiness in my mind. I reach into the dryer, pulling out a warm, soft towel. I fold it effortlessly, like I have done thousands of times before. There is no need to put my thoughts into what I am doing. I have advanced degrees and over 10,000 hours of experience in laundry. I am a master. The more I move, washing, drying, folding, washing, drying, folding, I feel a sense of calm come over me. Here, I am not questioning myself. I am not caught in another wild learning curve. I am just being. My hands are guided by muscle memory, washing, drying, folding, washing, drying, folding. My heart stopped racing, slowing to a calm beat, washing, drying, folding. I was moving as if someone had set me on autopilot. Now, with the anxiety out of my body, my mind calmed, organizing 1 million thoughts into a coherent question. What am I going to do about this living situation? Am I renewing my lease or am I moving somewhere else? Washing, drying, folding. Without warning, my mind drifts to another time I felt this sense of ease, like I was moving without thinking. It was during a walk I was taking with my girls. In 2016, I took a rare walk to the grocery store with my oldest daughters, Diana and Yemi. Usually I drive, rushing from one task to the next, always pressed for time. But that day, the warm sun and the promise of a slow, unhurried walk with my girls convinced me to leave the car keys behind. Diana and Yemi walked a step ahead of me, caught up in their world, chatting about whatever was happening in their summer programs. I trailed behind, enjoying the sound of their voices and the ease of the afternoon. It was one of those simple moments where everything felt right until Yemi's voice cut through the air with a line that stopped me. Because poverty does shit to you. She said, her tone as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. I couldn't believe what I just heard. My 15-year-old daughter, Yemi, who knew better than to swear in front of me, had just let that sentence roll off her tongue like talking about it. Diana's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened in shock, quickly followed by a look of sheer horror, and then she burst into laughter. It was that kind of laughter that was impossible to hold back and made your sides hurt. Yemi, oblivious at first, quickly caught on. She froze, looking at her sister, then at me, as if trying to figure out what was so funny. And then she finally realized what she'd said. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widened with embarrassment. I just stood there for a moment, trying to process it all. Hmm. So poverty does shit to you, huh? I murmured, trying to keep a straight face, fighting the urge to laugh. Tell me, what has it done to y'all? The girls exchanged a look, still giggling, but they could tell from my voice that I wasn't angry. I was genuinely curious. And at that moment, I knew this conversation was about more than just a slip of the tongue. It was about the realities we were all living, the truths we were beginning to understand, and the ways we tried to make sense of our world. As a mom, a large part of my mothering practice was marked by shame, fear, and a lot of insecurity. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, once wrote this. People very often say to me, how did you do it? How did you raise a baby and write a book? And the answer is, I didn't do housework for 4 years. I am not a superwoman. Living in squalor, that was the answer. Like her and her child, we lived in squalor. But my friend group wasn't marked by a bunch of J.K. Rowlings, not early on, at least. I wasn't surrounded by people who understood the hard choice between keeping a nice and respectable, there's that word again, home, and pursuing my dreams or investing time in creating the kind of life that will make a difference in my children's future. So they talked, they gossiped and judged me for not having the tidiest kids or an immaculate apartment. But it was never just about cleanliness. They were judging me for not being feminine enough. They were judging me for not being a lady and for not being domestic enough. Those ugly feelings affected the way that I parented my children, what and who I allowed and didn't allow into their childhood experiences. For example, I didn't let my children have company. I didn't have company. Their childhood didn't include fun sleepovers, and my early days as a mother didn't include girls' nights. We didn't have barbecues and evenings filled with movies and games, at least not with people outside of our home. I was ashamed and afraid of what would happen if I let outsiders in. Would that judgment lead to accusations of neglect? Could I lose my kids? Because in trying to build a future for them, people would think their present was dangerous at worst and subpar at best. What was the fine line? And where was the crossing point? There were too many unknowns and the stakes were too high to risk. So I played it safe by keeping everyone else out and locking us in. Fear kept us isolated, and isolation kept the fear alive. I also played it safe by appeasing my children to calm tantrums. To the best of my ability, I couldn't risk the noise for our safety and to keep a roof over our heads. When I first moved into an apartment in Madison, I had an experience that made me so paranoid that if my children breathed wrong, I was on them. The fear of eviction was a constant, gnawing worry at the back of my mind. It was a terror that seemed to control how I parented. When I first moved into my second apartment in Madison, I knew I had to do something about it. I had 6 kids to think about. The last thing I wanted was to be locked out. As a lesson from Evicted kept reminding me, Black men are locked up, Black women are locked out. I never experienced homelessness, and I was determined to keep it that way. So, with my fear as my motivation, I decided to be proactive. I knocked on every door of every neighbor who lived on my floor and wing of the building. Maybe if they knew me, if they knew my children, they'd come to me first if there were any problems instead of going straight to management. Maybe then I wouldn't have to worry so much about that looming threat of eviction. And if I took care of that, then I would be able to mother my children with less fear. The hallway carpet was ugly, gray, and industrial. The doors was old, wooden, and creaky. But I walked and knocked anyway, introducing myself like I was campaigning for office. Knock, knock, knock. The first door creaked open, and I offered excuse me, and I offered a smile. Hi, my name is Sagashus, and I just want to let you know that I moved into apartment 114 with my babies. I have 6 of them, ranging from a toddler to a high schooler. So, I'm a grad student juggling a lot, and I really depend on my village. So if for any reason you need me, don't hesitate to come by. And if you have any questions or concerns about me and my children, I am happy to talk. Here's my information, and I look forward to connecting with you. Some conversations ended right there with the polite welcome to the neighborhood. Others lasted a little longer, where we exchanged pleasantries and talked about the building. I walked away from most doors with the impression that I had made a real connection, that people understood I was approachable, and that they would come to me if there were a problem. But then one day, I came home and saw a note tacked to my creaky wooden door, a noise complaint. My heart sank. Why didn't they come to me first? The complaint came from the elder who lived right across from me. She had spoken to my oldest son, Cho, about not bouncing his basketball in the building. But when she heard the sound again, she didn't bother to talk to him again. She went straight to the management. Management and I discussed the complaint, and eventually it became clear that the bouncing ball she heard hadn't even come from my apartment. It was from another neighbor's place. But in my head, Miss Ainsley Anxiety, which is somebody I introduced earlier, I talk about Ainsley Anxiety is the personification of my struggle with anxiety. So she's a whole entire person that lives in my head at times. But in my head, Miss Ainsley Anxiety, as I like to call her, kept whispering that this was just a warning. Under the right conditions, that complaint could quickly turn into a family of 9. Me, my 6 kids, prodigal, and my bonus daughter, Nari, living on the street. And then what? What would I do with 6 kids? Where would we go? Who would rent to a woman with 6 children and an eviction on her record? The thought of it haunted me. A constant reminder that no matter how many doors I knocked on or how many connections I made, the fear of being locked out was always just a breath away. So I was careful about how I disciplined my children, to what extent I held them accountable. More often than I'm proud to admit, I didn't always hold them to the highest standards because I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, they'd push back and rebel and scream or test boundaries the way that strong willed, hurt, or traumatized children often do. Instead, I hushed and shushed them when they needed consistency and structure. At times, without saying it, I was silently pleading, please be quiet, or you're going to get us all put out. Other times, I just flat out said it because when you're a single parent living in a space where you share a wall with strangers who may or may not file a complaint against you or your children for being too loud, a complaint that can lead to a 30-day notice that in turn leaves a family of seven, eight, and sometimes nine unhoused, the stakes are always high. The fear of losing that what little we had was a constant presence. So yes, in my own family, amongst my children, I shrank and I played it small, parenting safely, even when it didn't serve them. And yet, even through all that fear, I tried to build a family culture that promoted good values, our family values, because values shape the way we live just as much as money does, if not more. I tried to make places that often felt like cages feel less like places that confined us and more like our homes. The idea had come from the time I spent with the therapist. He told me that if I wanted to unify my household, I had to build a culture rooted in ideas and beliefs that matter to us. I had to get my children to buy into a set of thoughts and practices we could all live by and rally around. Because I was afraid to discipline my children, I had started going to therapy. There, my therapist told me that instead of obsessing over disciplining my children, I should turn my attention to creating a family culture where both the expectations and consequences were clear. The kids should know what to expect at all times. I know he might have meant one thing, but I took that idea and ran with it. I remember coming home and calling one of our family meetings while still living in campus housing. My oldest child couldn't have been more than 12, and the youngest at the time was no more than 2 years old. Family meeting, I yelled. A bunch of little voices echoed behind me. Mama said it's a family meeting. Family meeting, y'all. It's a family meeting. Come on. We gathered around the table. All right, you all, I said, here's the deal. I know we all have different last names, and we're not going to change that. But what if we created an acronym that combined all of our last names together? That way, we can have one family name. What's an acronym? Cho asked. An acronym is when you take letters, usually the first letter of a bunch of words, and form one word, I explained. If we were to take the first letter of each of our names and create one word, what would it be? Eagerly they got to work. With pens and papers in hand, they started to work on different combinations. But wait, before we get too far, I interrupted. Come up with a word that means something. It has to be a name that makes us proud. For weeks, we met exploring different ways we could combine our names to create one that would be strong enough to lead us for years to come. And then finally, we came up with one. HELM, Helm. What do you all think about the word helm? I asked them. No one seemed to like it at first. Some of the kids scrunched their faces, and others flat out said they didn't like it. Diana, look it up for me, please, I said eagerly, waiting for the big reveal. Googling the word, she said, helm, a tiller or wheel, and any associated equipment for steering a ship or boat. Everyone looked underwhelmed and confused, including Diana. Okay, I said to her. Now read the next definition. Quickly going to the page she was on, she repeated the word again and then went right into the definition: a position of leadership. I repeated the words: a position of leadership. Feeling a sense of pride come over me, I looked at everyone at the table. That's who we are, a family that leads and never forget that. We are going to lead ourselves, our extended family, our community, and by living a lifestyle rooted in values. We're going to live with intention and we're going to live in the present with our futures in mind. Pick up your pens and paper and list all the things you love about our family, all the things you want to change, and how you want the world to see each of us and all of us. From there, we're going to start building our family culture. Wait, mommy, what? Yemi said, looking confused. I looked around and noticed that everyone was struggling to understand too. My fault, y'all. Let me slow down. I said, laughing at myself and realizing I was talking to my toddlers and teenagers like I was talking to my college students. When Layton was born, we went through the same process, adding a W to our name and changing it to Wham, which means an act or instance of flowing or heaping up abundantly, a surge. With this new addition, our family identity evolved, but the core message remained. Our family was a force, united and driven by purpose. Wham wasn't just a name, it was a declaration of who we were and aspired to be. Every day I tried to instill this belief in my children, reminding them that we were more than our circumstances. We were builders of our future. This belief was encapsulated in the vision statement that has guided our journey. Wham! Vision 2039. Date, partner, and marry intentionally. Parent responsibly, lovingly, and purposefully. Embrace family. Love, respect, and care for each other, including extended family. Be kind. Take care of mental health through awareness, medicine, and therapy. Respect everyone. By 2039, my youngest child will be 25. My hope is that by offering the vision to them and creating it with them, it will usher each one of them into adulthood with a sense of direction, purpose, and inspiration. One of the main pillars of my vision is for us to heal and create a healthy line of generations to come. In our dirty, unkempt home, I had speakers installed so that my children and I could listen to audiobooks, stories that celebrated resilience and kindness, hoping to instill a sense of worth that no external judgment could diminish. In the spaces that often felt like cages, I introduced family retreats because we couldn't afford to go to resorts and getaways where we enjoy good food. I introduced family retreats because we couldn't afford to go to resorts and getaways, where we introduced good food and extended time together, delving into the ideas that would ultimately become our foundation. These small, intentional acts were my way of planting seeds of hope and resilience in my children. Our home became a sanctuary, not just from the outside world's harsh views, but from the creeping doubts that sometimes settle within. And in that sanctuary, we laughed a lot. Cho could always be counted on for his impulsive and shady comments. He's the kid who says what everyone is thinking, but those kids know better than to say it out loud. He's my politically incorrect one. We'll just leave it at that. Then there's Rylan with his endless back in my day stories. Back in my day, when I was a baseball player, I had more home runs than anybody. But the paparazzi was on me too hard, so I had to quit and I became an astronaut. The stories will go on from there. When it wasn't Cho's off-color jokes or Ryland's fantastical tales about a life he was too young to have lived, it was Layden's backhanded compliments. Mom, you are so hot, fat, and miserable, but I just love you. In his defense, he was only repeating my own words back to me. And then there was all the kids playing the dozens, roasting each other and talking about each other's dads. That's why your dad. So I ain't even about to start talking about your dad with his. And when it wasn't that, it was the kids imitating me and everyone else. Hey, Brooklyn, who is this? Imitating my tone and mannerisms perfectly. They begin a sentence with, everyone, including me, would be falling out with laughter because if we didn't have a dime, we had plenty of imagination. And that kept us all entertained as we lived in our little bubble of poverty, strategizing and laughing our way to a better life. Through it all, I clung to the belief that our values, laughter, and plan would be the bedrock upon which my children could stand tall and proud, no matter what came our way. And as a mother who had often felt crushed by shame and fear, I dared to dream bigger, not just for myself, but for my children. I was so bold that I dared to believe that I, along with my children, could break generational poverty, build generational wealth, and find joy in the process we had each other. And find joy in the process because we had each other. The dream of purchasing a home was the cornerstone of that vision. While doing so doesn't erase the shame and embarrassment, it creates a sense of pride that squeezes a lot of those ugly feelings out. And if I dream big enough and have faith big enough to set my sights on the right kind of home, then we can have the kind of space that will allow us to live clutter free in a home that could invite others, in a home that we can invite others over to hosting events without fear or shame. This dream wasn't just about bricks and mortar, it was about creating a legacy, a place where my children could feel safe, loved, and valued. But equally important, having space with walls that were detached from our neighbors would give my children the freedom to express their emotions, scream, yell, cry, and release the anxiety, fear, and hurt they carry in their bodies in ways that make sense to them at the time. It would also allow them to allow me the freedom to respond to and guide them in a way that meets them where they are without the fear of judgment influencing my response. In a way, this home would be our healing place, a space where we could grow and mend the wounds that poverty had inflicted. I'm convinced that such an environment will foster emotional resilience and a deeper connection between us, helping them navigate their feelings in a healthy and supportive way. Buying a home for my children would mean having a safe space for us to live and grow and heal from a lot of the shit that poverty has done to my babies. I think about this as I wash, dry, and fold clothes in the building's laundry room. And then another thought takes over. My children are the bulls in the china shop. So they couldn't go to Chicago if something happened to me. And while Diana may be able to watch over them, now that she has moved out and gone to college, she is no longer in my lease. Where was she housed now? What would happen to my children if I was no longer on this earth? If something were to happen to me, where would they go? I want them to stay together and have a home that anchors them, even if I'm no longer there. In a world where we've always been outsiders, I want them to have something truly theirs. A place they can always return to, a sanctuary offering shelter, security, and the love they need to heal and move forward. It's time that I buy a house. Between the pressing needs of my parents, my man, and my babies, it's time for us to claim the space we deserve, a place we can finally call home. All right, you all. Um, as I was reading and trying to fight back my own tears, right? Um, I was thinking about where my mind was when I was writing that chapter. And I had no idea I would be at this conference when I was writing this book, but I was definitely thinking about social workers. I was thinking about how in the past, when I've presented at this conference and when I've presented in front of social workers in other spaces, I've talked about this fear of always losing my babies and why I started speaking to social workers in the first place. I started speaking to you all because I wanted to overcome that fear and I wanted to be an advocate for women like me. And I wanted to bridge the gap between us and you all. And when I had the first talkback conference years ago, that was a key piece of that conference. And so this chapter was really thinking about that history that I had lived, and it was thinking about that relationship that I had been working on and forming and building. And the funny thing about writing, you can have a set of intentions. When I wrote A Pot to Piss In, I didn't realize that I thought I was buying a book about the journey of buying a house. But as time went on, I realized after the book was written that I was writing a book about overcoming economic shame. When Angela invited me to this conference, I had no idea what I would talk about. But something told me, read Poverty Does Shit to You. And then in hindsight, I realized that something in me subconsciously was always writing that chapter for you all. I wrote that chapter as a way to make my life accessible, give you all insight into what so many women are dealing with. And I wrote it subconsciously to be the study. I wrote it as an extension of the work that I've been doing. And I know that because the chapter before it is about my relationship with um, and our family's relationship with the prison industrial complex and jail. And so this chapter, quite naturally, is about my relationship with social services or that ongoing fear. The next thing I would say about that is Toni Morrison talks about how someone asked her, why do you not write about white people in your work? And she talked about how arrogant that question was and how self-centered that question was. It was coming from a white person. But what she also talks about in her work and her essays around that work is how um, often, even when she's writing stories about Black people in particular, their lives are shaped by systems and their relationships with white people, even when you don't see, and racism and fear, and how they're navigating these things. And so, even though a white person may not be chapter in the book, their presence is always there. And I think that even though I'm not talking about social workers in this book, your presence is always there, right? There's always this need to offer a tool to add clarity to your work, um, to give insight from the woman's perspective or the parent's perspective. Um, and so, yeah, I wanted to share that. I also wanted to share how, for me, story is people often look at the value of numbers and people say cash is king. But I believe that story is one of the most powerful things that we can own. It's the most expensive thing that many of us own. It's the thing that we paid the highest price for. And it's probably one of the most valuable assets that we have. Stories explain so many things, and it's the it and while we don't have a campfire, I believe Zoom is the modern day campfire for many of us to gather around to hear stories. When I wrote this book, I never wanted this book to be interpreted or understood as a story alone. I didn't want it to be a struggle story. I wanted to be seen in part as a hero's quest. But I also wanted this book, it was very intentional about how this journey of purchasing a home intersects with so many different systems. So I wanted this book to be a book about culture, about systems. And so, with that being said, I'm giving you this because I think people often see the entertainment in the story, but there was a time when we were growing up where we were listening to stories about to learn um, lessons about character and maybe about morality and about ethics and about all of these things. And for me, I tell stories as a way to talk about leadership and systems. And he's very using these very everyday moments that could be taken for granted. Um, and say they're like good medicine. Sometimes they go down and they taste good, or well, they ain't gonna taste good, but it hot at often we'll take something and because it's not painful, we don't realize how powerful it is, right? Um, and so that's that piece. I want to transition into a couple of points for you all. When I was living this, I didn't have language for what I was doing. I wasn't thinking in models or frameworks. I was thinking in real time under pressure, trying to keep my children safe, housed, intact, and whole. But looking back, especially now in the world we're living in, I can see leadership clearly. What I want to do now is make visible what was happening beneath the surface of the story, not to analyze it to death, but to name the moves, because these are the same moves many of the families you work with are making every day, often without recognition. And I want to share this. And as I share this, I want you, if I share things that are coming across as really simple, and if you heard it before, then this is just a lesson in taking things back to basics. If I share something that you haven't heard before, then this is a lesson in something else, right? Um, this is a moment of, it's an eye-opening moment. It's a moment where information is being introduced, but I think both are valuable because I know we have a range of people here today. So I wanted to kind of create something that was in the middle. So, point one, naming reality without letting it become identity. When my daughter said poverty does shit to you, what mattered most wasn't the language, it was the truth underneath it. I could have shut that conversation down. I could have corrected her tone, punished the word choice, or redirected the moment, but I didn't. Instead, I got curious. I asked, what has it done to you? That was a leadership choice. Here's why this matters. When families are living inside instability, silence is not neutral. Silence allows fear to harden into identity. Silence teaches children that reality is either unspeakable or shameful. Naming reality without dramatizing it, without moralizing it, creates space for agency. Naming doesn't make the situation worse. Naming gives people a way to locate themselves inside of it. As social workers, you see this all the time. When people can name what's happening, they stop internalizing it as a personal failure. That moment wasn't about poverty, it was about meaning making. Point number two, understanding fear as an organizing system. One of the hardest things for me to see in hindsight is how much fear was organizing my parenting. I was always afraid. I was afraid of being evicted. I was afraid of noise. I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid of being reported. I was afraid of losing everything before I had even gained anything. Fear didn't just make me anxious, fear shaped my decisions. It shaped how I disciplined. It shaped how much I held my children accountable, how isolated we became, how small I played as a parent. And here's the key insight: fear doesn't just scare people, reorganizes behavior. Many of the families you serve are not non-compliant. They are highly compliant. They're highly compliant with fear. They are making decisions that make sense inside threats. When we miss that, we misdiagnose the problem. I want to pause here because this is where I think systems often miss people. When fear is organizing behavior, what looks like resistance is often protection. What looks like inconsistency is often adaptation. What looks like disengagement is often vigilance. And when we intervene without accounting for fear, we unintentionally escalate it all. So, one of the most important questions I've learned to ask as a parent and as a professional is not, why are you doing this? But what are you protecting? That question alone can change the tone of an entire interaction. You all know as I read this, um, I'm often so busy. Like I'm always go, 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 right, 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 do, do, do. I'm always getting things done. And I got to stop and say, what an honor it is to be here. When Angela said that I've been a part of several of these events, um, that hadn't hit my spirit yet. But as I'm reading these points to you, I see my growth, not just as a presenter, but as a thinker, as somebody that's invested in this work, as an ally in the work that you do. And I feel so honored. I feel so honored to be in a space where I'm able to see that growth. But I'm thankful that you all have given me the opportunity for that. When I started this work, I was just a scared mother. Um, I hadn't become a doctor yet, but I just remember the fear, and the way I wanted to overcome this fear is I wanted to sit with the people who had the power to shape my life. But more importantly, that fear was more about building relationships with the people who had the power to take my children away. That was my biggest fear and had been for a very long time. And so these tears, which my kids always make fun of me. They say, "Oh, we know she's gonna break down crying." Because this is when I speak, it's it's some of the few times that I'm able to actually slow down and let all of this stuff process, no matter how much I've practiced this. And we've done a lot of work together and we've done good work. And I thank you all. All right. And I'm proud of you all as much as I'm proud of myself. All right. Let's go to point three. Culture as a stabilizing force when circumstances are not. At a certain point, I realized that I couldn't parent my way out of fear, but I could build culture. I couldn't control the building. I couldn't control the neighbors. I couldn't control the systems watching us, but I could control language. I could control values. I could control what we stood for. Creating Helm and later Whelm wasn't about being cute or creative. It was about anchoring. Culture gave us shared language. It gave us shared meaning. It gave us a shared future to move toward. Culture stabilized us when circumstances could not. This is important for social workers because culture often gets treated as soft, but culture does real work. It holds identity steady when everything else is moving. Point number four, power is choice, not control. I didn't have power in a traditional sense. I didn't have money. I didn't have margin for mistakes. I didn't have safety nets for, I didn't have safety nets I trusted, but I did have choice. I could choose. I could choose how we talked about ourselves. I could choose what we believed about our future. I could choose how we interpreted our circumstances, and I could choose what we practice daily. Power isn't the absence of danger. And I really want to stress that point. Power is not the absence of danger. Power is the presence of choice. This matters because many systems unintentionally communicate to families that If they don't have options, they don't have agency. But that's not true. Choice exists even when options are limited. Point number 5, relational integrity over respectability. A lot of my fear was tied to respectability. It was tied to being judged, being seen as inadequate, being perceived as dangerous or negligent. So I tried to parent in a way that looked safe, even when it wasn't serving my children. Eventually, I had to choose. Do I parent for appearance or do I parent for integrity? Respectability asks people to perform safety for systems. Now, I want to stop there because when you look up the history of respectability politics, respectability was created as a way to protect Black people in a society that saw us less than. And so I never want to send the message that respectability is bad because it serves a purpose. What I want to send a message is respectability is not always the answer. And I want to send the message that sometimes respectability without awareness can be as dangerous or more dangerous than if that layer wasn't there at all. So again, I want to go back to this idea that respectability asks people to perform safety for systems, and that's a tool in a toolkit. But integrity asks people to build safety in relationships. When families choose integrity, it can look messy, it can look loud, it can look non compliant, but it's often where healing actually begins. So, in these last 6 minutes, before we get to the Q&A part, I want to bring this back to, well, two things I want to say. I want to say again, I want to reinforce this idea that if these points that I shared, if one or several or all of them were basics, then we just went back to basics today. If some of these ideas were new ideas to you, then I'm glad to have offered that. I believe overall that social workers are doing the best that they can with the resources they have and with the understanding that they have. I believe that you all are some of the most important and powerful people, even though pay doesn't always reflect that. And I believe that some of the work that you all do is some of the most impactful work. And so I want to acknowledge you all's humanity in all of this. And I want to bridge that to the present and what's going on in the social political landscape today. Whether we agree with whatever our, despite what our politics may be, I want to bring us back to this. I want to close by returning us to the moment we're standing in right now. Many of the families you serve today are living inside of a level of uncertainty that doesn't feel theoretical. There is a fear of sudden separation, fear of being seen, fear of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person, fear the rules might change overnight, and that those changes could cost them everything. And whether or not ICE ever shows up at their door, the possibility is enough to shape behavior. That kind of fear does something to people. It reorganizes routines. It changes how parents speak to their children. It changes how visible people allow themselves to be. It changes what feels safe to hope for. In many ways, it's the same fear you heard moving quietly through that chapter I just read. Different context, different kind of pressure, but fear nonetheless. And I want to name something else because this room deserves honesty too. That same uncertainty is also affecting you. Many social workers right now are carrying moral fatigue. You are asked to care deeply inside of systems that feel brittle. You are asked to support families while your own sense of safety, clarity, and trust in institutions may be eroding. Burnout doesn't always come from too much work. Sometimes it comes from working without meaning, for feeling like you're constantly responding, containing, documenting without enough space to remember why this work matters or what it means to protect. So I want to offer this as a reframe, not as a solution, but as an anchor. The work you do is not just about services, compliance, or outcomes. It is meaning work. Every time you help a family name reality without collapsing into shame, you are protecting meaning. Every time you recognize fear without letting it dictate the story, you are protecting meaning. And every time you honor culture, dignity, and relationship inside unstable systems, you are protecting meaning. And that work matters. Even when the larger world feels hostile or unpredictable, especially when the larger world feels hostile or unpredictable. Because when meaning holds, people hold, families hold, and helpers hold. You are not responsible for fixing the political climate. You are not responsible for creating safety everywhere it doesn't exist, but you are participating every day. And whether fear gets to be the author of the story, you play a role in that. And that is not small work. So as we move into questions, I invite you to hold this gently. You don't have to save people to support them. You don't have to resolve fear to help protect meaning. And you don't have to be untouched by this moment to be affected inside of it. Thank you for the care you carry. Thank you for the restraint, the witnessing, and the integrity this work requires. And I'm happy to open this floor up to the questions that are here.
My gosh, Sagashus, thank you so much. I'm going to try to keep it together on my end. So I got love just like pouring into the Q&A, people saying how much appreciation they have, how this has confirmed things for them, how they feel able to share their own story. So not really questions, a lot of love there. One comment I'll share that has a question. Just like with our bodies, being hard, tight feels safe, even though it can be harmful, especially over time. Thank you for sharing that question. What are you protecting? What other good questions do you have to pull that information out?
All right, so just like with our bodies, being hard, tight feels safe, even though it can be harmful, especially over time. Thank you for sharing that question. What are you protecting? So the question she said, thank you for sharing, is what are you protecting? What other good questions to pull that information out? Ah, I see what the question is. So instead of just asking a person, what are you protecting? You're saying, what are different ways we can take that, we can explore that question.
Well,
Is that what the
I
question is?
I think you had said, rather than asking like, why are you doing this? The better question is, what is it that you're protecting, and
Yes.
sort of the role that fear might play. And so I may be thinking that it's a question of like for social workers, what other questions might help us explore that with someone to sort of get at that, really tender, vulnerable, like what are you protecting, or where does the fear live for you? And yeah,
Mhm.
that's my interpretation. And I apologize if I'm getting that wrong.
No, no, that's a beautiful question. Um, hmm. I think that so I so I will answer the question about how do we get if we're trying to find out what people are protecting, what risk they're dealing with and what risk they're facing, how do we get to that? Because maybe that one question in and of itself is not sufficient. Um, One thing someone told me years ago is relationship overrules, right? So part of it is when someone, when you have a relationship with someone, the question itself may not be the most important thing, but the understanding, even if you don't, if you have a certain level of emotional intelligence as well, right? And I say that in a non judgmental way. I say that as often we ignore the power of emotional intelligence, but um, I know it plays a huge part in the work that you all are doing. So having a relationship with the person and kind of having that emotional intelligence allows you to say, you know what, I hear what you're going through and I understand that you're not showing up in these spaces. And I want to ask you first, um, how's your safety right now? Do you feel safe? Um, are there any things that you're concerned about that you're not letting us, that even your body may be aware of, but your mind may not be able to articulate? Um, because I know that you're a parent that's invested in this, and I know that this is important to you, and I know these things. But I also know that the world is sometimes a scary place. So let's sit in that for a minute. I think acknowledging a person's humanity makes it so much easier for those questions to naturally evolve and to show up. And while you may have the question in the back of your head, what are you protecting? What's the risk for you? Um, sitting in them and just acknowledging that for them, the world itself may feel scary because you understand that Black men are locked up, Black women are locked out. You understand that, well, and I'm talking specifically about Black people in these examples I'm giving, but not overall in the world of social work. We know about Jim Crow, we know about Jane Crow, right? We know about these things. So just say, you know what? I understand that the role that I play can feel very scary. I understand the world is a very scary place. And when I see you not showing up, I don't automatically read you not doing this or whatever's going on as defiance. I just am wondering what exactly um, do you feel safe? And I think that in itself opens up because a person may not even realize they don't feel safe. So that question in itself, I think, do you feel safe? And depending on who you get, hell no, I don't feel safe. The fact that you're in my face, I don't feel safe. Okay, you get that. Let's take that and run with it, right? But yeah, acknowledging that.
Thank you. Another question we had was, how do you stay consistent with putting your narrative into something material to keep coming back to?
How do you interpret that question?
Well, I think you were speaking to what came to mind for me was, in your book, sharing about what you did with your family to sort of create strength and story as a way of relationship, community, history building within your family. And so, and maybe ideas for how do you put your narrative into something material. I don't know if they mean like writing it down or in this like family meeting style that you spoke to, but yeah, any thoughts you have about. And I'm also thinking about something you said that I wrote down, which is um, uh, our stories are one of the hardest earned things. I can't find my quote now here.
Okay, I get it. I
um,
know. I understand the
okay,
question now.
yeah.
So that quote is, our story is one of the most expensive things we own. It's the thing we paid the highest price for. Um, and as far as the story being material, I think what I'm understanding is how do we take these abstract things that are kind of like words and translate them um, into something that has, how do I take something that people often see as abstract as story and turn them into um, lessons around leadership or lessons around power or into something that's more concrete. And I think part of it is because my background is in narrative, right? I have a bachelor's in English. I have a master's in African American studies. I have a PhD in English rhetoric with a distributed minor in rhetoric, motherhood studies, African American studies, and women's studies. And while all of that sounds fancy and credentialed and et cetera, that's not the point of why I say that. I say that because I've spent a lot of years having to take story and analyze it from all of these different perspectives. And in a world that doesn't often value story, even though what's interesting is we know the value of story. I'm gonna give you a perfect example. Apple know that Apple couldn't sell Apple by saying, and this has this many specs. You go to Apple Store, you don't know what the hell they're talking about. This has this many specs and this many gigabytes. We don't know what that means, but not the average person. But if you remember that first, um, one of the early advertisements, they said, this is for the misfits, the weird ones, the crazy ones, right? People was rallied around Apple because it was a, a rebellious brand, right? At the time, at least. They use story to get us to buy into science and technology. Story, whether you believe in the Bible or not, and that's not my point here, but let's say when we think about creation myths, is people don't say story that we threw out in the beginning. God used algorithms and algebra, calculus. He said in the beginning, um, let there be light. And it was good, right? Everything story is an ongoing act of creation. And when you see story as an ongoing act of creation, it's much more easier And if you see it as a way to assemble people, if you see it as a way to um, reclaim power and make meaning in the world, it becomes tangible because it actually is tangible. It becomes material because it actually is. The things we utter out of our mouths are things that we often create. And I'm not talking about manifestation. I'm not even talking about affirmations. We often create our life as we go through story. And because I see it that way, um, and because I understand it that way, it's a lot easier. That's the step that makes it a lot easier to translate story into something more tangible. Um, One last example I can give about that. In this book, I'm often journaling and I'm journaling my next steps. And then all of a sudden, from the journaling, my feet are moving into that direction. And then from the feet moving into that direction, my hands are moving in that direction. So for me, story is also always tied to the material world, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Another question was, could you repeat again about, well, I'll mention several comments have been, where can we get these 5 points in writing?
Yes,
Um, and so, if you're open to sharing them,
I will.
Sagashus, we can put them on the website with the recording once we get that out there. But
Yes.
one person asked, could you repeat again about integrity and what integrity asks people to build?
Oh, I think I talked about integrity a couple of times. So I talked about integrity. Integrity asks people to build safety in relationships. That was the exact quote. So respectability asks people to perform safety for systems, and integrity asks people to build safety in relationships.
Thank you. And speaking of respectability, we had a question along those lines as well. Can you expand on the dangers of respectability without awareness?
Yes. So a lot of times we'll tell girls, and I'm speaking specific when I'm talking specifically from a Black woman's lens and perspective, but there's versions and iterations of this in every culture, right? You'll tell a little girl, don't wear those tight pants. And then we associate don't wear those tight pants with you're being fast. Now, when I wrote the infamous Mother's book, the coffee table book, 19 stories in that book, almost all of those women had experienced some form of sexual trauma. I didn't choose them based on that. I chose them based on what they were doing in the community. But as I dove deeper into their stories, that was a through line through almost all of the stories. And if a woman hadn't experienced it, there was fear around it, right? I share that because a lot of times we're telling little girls, don't wear those tight pants. You're going to come across as looking fast, right? Because we're trying to protect that girl because we understand what she doesn't understand. We understand that we live in a world where children are often violated. And so we're telling her to be more respectable um, because ultimately we're thinking that that's going to save her. But we understand as we have evolved that telling little girls to not wear tight pants or grown women to not wear short skirts doesn't protect folks. Ma- Telling people and holding people who violate people is what protect folks, right? Holding people accountable who violates people. That's what, and that more education around that is what protects people. So that's what I mean by respectability.
Thank you. I think our last question here before I'll close us out with a few other details at 12 or at 1:15. There's a bit of a comment here and then a question. I'm going to read the whole thing. You said that stories are the most expensive asset we can have, and that really resonated with me. I see that reflected in how reality TV and social media increasingly compensate people for sharing their real life stories. It feels like our culture deeply values what is raw, lived, and human, especially in a world that often feels isolating and disconnected. At the same time, capitalism often extracts value from people's stories, creating a system in which heightened transparency or more dramatic narratives are rewarded with visibility and compensation. So that's the comment. The question is, do you have guidance for how social workers of color can honor and share their stories in predominantly white spaces while navigating the very real risks of tokenization or discrimination?
Ooh wee, baby. Let me
It's a
tell
big
you.
one.
But you know what? That was the longest question, but that's the one that resonated with me. I usually have to see stuff in writing for it to really resonate, but I was able to click with that one because I remember years of going to therapy. I was going to therapy with a white woman, and then I ended up going to therapy with a black man who they actually ended up being married, and I didn't know that. And the lesson, I remember I would always go to therapy and I would not talk about what was going on. I would only present a certain part of my story because I was aware and always afraid that if I presented another part of my story or the whole story, there would be consequences. I go into therapy one day, my brother had committed suicide, and I was struggling with this. I was struggling bad because he had been reaching out and I didn't have the money to go to him in Florida. And I was just torn up. And this was one time that I wasn't my strong, performative, censored self. And that woman went and pulled out. If you all, I'm sure I've told the story before. She went and pulled that book out. It was a DSM book, and she immediately diagnosed me with being bipolar because she said you've had periods and where you have climbed and you were very she called it manic, I believe, and then there was periods where you just crashed. And this was the moment she was qualifying as my crash. And fortunately, I had a friend who was a psychiatrist who had an actual MD. And he said, Sagashus, I've been knowing you your whole life. Ain't nothing bipolar about you. Now, you might have other stuff going on, but that ain't one of them. And I had to reflect on that moment. And I remember in our therapy sessions, and I always give my therapist grace because I realize that my therapists are people. So I have to hear like what are their hot spots. And this is getting to your question. I remember every time I talked about being a single mom with the amount of kids I had and having a PhD, I remember her saying, I want to get a PhD, but then I got married and I had kids. And I saw her reflect on her life through my life. And so, what I had to learn in my therapy sessions is that I had to learn what are the boundaries and when am I bumping up against safety and when am I crossing the boundaries into a scary space. So before I share my story, I always make sense of the environment I'm in, the players in that environment, the views. I understand something about the culture and the people, and I share a story that's going to allow me to often just bump up a boundary a little bit, but not cross it too far where it's going to cause problems for me or for the people. So it's so important to understand the context, the audience, and it's important to always acknowledge the humanity of the audience. Even people with the best intentions, sometimes they have things going on with them that they're not aware of. But as a Black person, we also understand double consciousness. We're always aware of ourselves and other people. So we have to kind of keep that in mind too. But the other piece that I want to say about this, and I'm going to wrap this up, is when I'm in those spaces, I don't share anything that I'm not comfortable sharing. So I will be super vulnerable with you. But when I tell you I got all type of stuff that I would at this point today, I wouldn't tell you all because I haven't processed it and I'm not comfortable. Um, so I'm vulnerable to the extent that feels safe for me. So no matter whose space I'm in, I won't I tell stories that I'm not worried about backlash behind. If it's backlash, I'm not out. So I said what I said. I think the very last thing, though I said the last thing was the last thing. I think that we always run the risk of being tokenized when we're in spaces. When I started this particular story today, I was very clear about how I wanted the story to be read. I didn't want it to be read as poverty. I didn't want it to be read as pathology. I think often when we tell stories, we have to be ahead of the game and say, how might these people read how might this particular audience read my story? And so before I share it and give you the gift of my story, I want to talk to you about how it should be read. I'm giving you the instructions, just like you give anything else. When you open up an iron or you open up anything else that comes with instructions, this is how this is intended to be used. So that level of being proactive also is important. Now, what people do, you can't control, but at least you frame the narrative.
Thank you so much, Sagacious. I wanted to close with one other comment that came in the question answer, which maybe sums up our experience with you today of a lot of people's, which was, you don't know how much I needed to hear this today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, thank you so much for being here. And thank you everyone in attendance for being a part of this event and for your commitment and efforts to confront racial injustice. Please watch for an email with a link to complete an evaluation on this presentation, and watch for a separate email regarding CEUs for those of you that requested them when you registered. You can go to our conference website for information on our closing plenary with Prentice Hemphill, which begins at 2 p.m. Central Time on YouTube. Thanks again. Thank you so much for being here. And Sagashus, if you haven't had a chance to check out the Q&A, there is lots of love in there for you.
You. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. And I will make sure you have that one pager.
Okay, yeah, you can just email
5 1.
it to me.
Yes. All right. So is
Okay,
everyone still here?
people are hopping off.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Mhm.
read. So can I read this while people are leaving,
Yep,
or will
yeah,
this be
as
through?
long as we don't end the call, you can see
Okay.
the what was put in the Q&A. So yeah, take your time.
Okay. Hmm. Look, I'm about to start crying again, Lord.
I know, me too. I mean, you're just so amazing. Every time I see you talk, I'm just like so moved by what you share and your commitment to, you're so altruistic and like telling these stories and the vision that you have for how this can help other people. It just blows me away every time.
Thank you. And thank you for putting up with me, Angela, because I know I'm a hard one to wrangle in. Uh,
If
and
it means
so
we get to have you here, good.
and you know what? And it's not because I'm a diva, it's because I have ADHD. It's like I'm the opposite of a diva, right? It's like, oh, um, once
Well,
I sit down,
also, it sounds like you had a doozy last night, so I hope you're okay.
you know what? It's so funny because last night wasn't my chaos this morning was just typical sagacious behavior. Last night though, last night was you know, I don't come out often. I have social anxiety. So even when I get on stage or whatever, I'm somewhere crying before I'm on stage. Like I have full blown attacks. Um,
Mhm.
and so when a friend is like, we need to come out, we need to talk, I have an issue, or whatever it may be, it takes a lot for me to do it. And so when they're like, hey, you know what, have a drink with me. I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, I don't usually do that, but you know what? This was so heavy, and I look, and the drink was so pretty. Like, it just looked so like don't like you gave me a Long Island iced tea. Like,
Oh,
look,
oof,
it
yeah.
sounds so nice, right? Long Island iced tea. Um, yeah, I found out today what's in that. And
Yes. Yeah, I couldn't handle that.
I couldn't either.
Well,
I
I'm
forgot
so
to tell you
happy.
all what the drink was.
I'm so happy
Oh,
you made it here nonetheless. And yeah, thank you so much.
these questions, these comments are so beautiful. Can you give an example of what may appear as non-compliance that are actually over-compliance with fear? Perhaps you can pull from your own experience. So there's no way I can give answer these questions, is it?
No, I mean, we do have 75 people still on that probably just don't want to hang up, like how I feel when I hear you speak. But so you can answer, and people may choose to hang on and listen.
Okay, so one example for this one, can you give examples of behavior that may appear as being called non-compliance that are actually over-compliance with fear? Perhaps you can pull from your own experience. So I didn't know I had social anxiety. And I didn't know until my children, my two of my three children, my six children were grown. And I remember it was Christmas and I gave them the money to go inside the store to do the shopping. And I was like, you all know what? I don't want to go in the store. And my daughter said, Mom, we know you don't want to go in the store. We've known our whole lives you have social anxiety. I'm like, what? And then it ended up being diagnosed later. But I say that to say when they were kids, I would not go inside of their violin concerts. I would not show up for anything, teacher meetings. And people looked at me as a difficult parent. But I always had this fear that if I went inside, I would lose my kids. I was always afraid that my kids would get swept away in the crowd. And so I wouldn't go into the meetings. And so someone would look at me not showing up for certain meetings as me being non compliant, but it wasn't that. I had a real fear without even knowing that that's what I had. And it just felt safe to not go. And I think a lot of times parents are dealing with fear that they're not even aware of. And so they're not showing up, not because they're rebelling against you or the system. Something in their body is saying, I don't feel okay. Um, does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
And then how do we get people to feel safe enough to be vulnerable? I think that goes back to the question about relationships. Um, but the scary thing is if you've had enough so for me, I've always had a village mentality. I couldn't finish my undergraduate degree without my family. I couldn't finish my master's and PhD without the community I was able to build in Madison, who were not blood family because my family's in Chicago. But I everywhere I go, I create that sense of family, and I have to trust the family that I'm building. I built relationships with social workers over the years because I knew that I needed you all to hear if my name ever came across your desk, which it has, in fact, happened since then, since I started building these relationships, people will be able to say, I've encountered this woman, she's talked to me about this, et cetera, et cetera. In what ways can you build relationships with people? And I know there are limitations in your work, right? Um, but I think the more people are able to build and see social workers in environments, whether it's church, conferences, grocery stores where they can see that you all are real people, I think it makes a difference. But also, what encounters are you having with people? Um, but there's still always the fear that even when I'm trusting you and I'm there and I'm present, are you going to stab me in the back? And that is a real fear, but that's also trauma that has probably happened way before folks have met you. So you're navigating a rough terrain, but it's also a worth it terrain. Um, we repeated the thing about integrity. Um, this one, okay. I can't organize all of my many thoughts into a question, but I just want to thank you so much for your vulnerability and honor the emotional labor is required of you to bring this into consciousness. It shouldn't require that, but I personally will take everything you said to heart and continue to reflect on it. Your kids and community are so blessed to have you, and we are all blessed to hear you today. Thank you. Thank you. Um, All right, I think if there's any other questions that people want to ask, I don't know who's left. I'm in Minnesota, 15 minutes from Minneapolis. My community is getting hit hard, and we are organizing hard. Thank you for your words. So encouraging. Oh, you know what? I had no idea we would have someone on from Minnesota today. Um, that means a lot. Thank you. Oh,
I'm muted. I was saying at the highest, we had 395 people here listening to your talk. So, and with it being virtual, we get people from internationally, but around the country. So yeah.
thank
I
you.
I also wanted to say, Sagacious, like, one thing that really stuck out to me when you said, I wrote this, you were talking about social workers, and you said, I wrote this I was always writing this chapter for you all. And I was thinking about like, I just, it had not really occurred to me, like, I had thought about like the male gaze, the white gaze, or kind of the double consciousness that you spoke about. But like the way you describe sort of the social worker gaze, this like awareness of like how might this be perceived, and in interaction with social work, it was just really powerful, and yeah, like something I want my students to hear, and sort of the influence of that awareness that you were holding, really beautifully expressed in that chapter that you read.
Thank you. Well, I'm here in the same city with you, Angela, so use me as you see fit. If you ever need me to come to a class, I'm happy. I love working with social workers. You have become one of my favorite social workers and nurses and midwives because I've had so many kids, right? So it's like these are the people who have shaped my life. Barbara Boosted, I thank you. I love you so much. If there's anything else before I log off of here, I try to go through the ones that seem like they were questions. You don't know. I would love to have a, okay. I think I've gotten as many
I
as
think
my,
you have.
okay. All right. I just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure, since I wouldn't be able to respond to people, I wanted to make sure that I spent time addressing these questions because they matter to me, and I don't know when I'm going to see you all again. So,
Yeah. Okay,
thank you.
Sagacious. Thank you. Take
I'll see
care.
you soon. Take
Okay, I
care.
hope so.